From the I-24 News Studios in Times Square in New York, this is Crossroads with Tal Heinrich.
Welcome to Crossroads, everyone. U.S. President Donald Trump touched down in London. His first state visit to the U.K. is currently underway. President Trump received a warm reception from the Queen, but his visit is overshadowed by some controversial remarks about British public figures. In a dramatic escalation in the U.S.-China trade negotiations, President Trump is now preparing to raise tariffs on all remaining imports from China. It is day 2 of trade talks between the U.S. and Mexico, but let's face the reality. Even if all these migrants, let's say, would have had a master's degree and a solid bank account back home, it wouldn't have been much easier for them to come here legally and get hired in the U.S., right?
Your point is very well taken.
But if you ask Custom and Border Patrol agents, they say we need a wall, we want a wall. How can Democrats argue with that?
Some of them say that.
The Trump administration has officially laid out the first part of its plan for achieving a lasting peace between Israel and the Palestinians. The proposal put forward by senior White House advisor and Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, includes a $50 billion economic package. The Palestinians are trying to send a message that peace is not for sale. But how does Israel view their out-of-hand rejection of this initiative?
We are not surprised.
And this is a very rare statement coming from Hamas. For sure, they're not intended to go to war giving such a statement. But in the Middle East, you know, neither side has to intend a war for a war to erupt. But here maybe lies the most important aspect of the deal.
Remember that remarks of this kind put every kind of right-wing government in Israel, even the current one with Prime Minister Netanyahu, in a very tough spot, because it's basically a green light from the White House to go ahead and annex parts of the West Bank.
The last couple of days have been very tense in the West Bank, with clashes between Israeli military forces and Palestinians. Some were arrested overnight. And we begin this half hour with breaking news out of Israel. The IDF, the Israeli military, has confirmed there was a rocket launch from Gaza into Israel. However, it was intercepted. If Israel really struck so far north into Syria, what does it tell you about Israel's defense capabilities and about Iranian entrenchment? We're talking about Iranian intelligence sites, weapons warehouses, training camps, all of them in the vicinity of the capital, Damascus, or in the Damascus airport. It makes me think that the divisions are not only in Libya itself, it's also the international powers divisions between them about what they see as the future or the right path going forward for Libya. Former U.S. Senator Joe Lieberman, the president today really unloaded on some U.S. allies in Europe. He lashed out on Twitter against French President Emmanuel Macron. Let's see what he tweeted. Pay for NATO or not. He also finished it with make France great again. Do you think the president is rightfully angry? The foreign minister, as we just heard, President Trump, he warmly welcomed Prime Minister Viktor Orban at the White House yesterday. But this warm hug was also followed by some criticism, both here domestically and also in Europe. Some lawmakers, they urged President Trump not to meet with him since they claim he does not represent American values. What's your answer to that? Joining me now to go in depth on this issue is a former ISIS bride herself, Tanya Joya. 6 years ago, she was living with her husband in Syria, a man who heads the Islamic State's English language propaganda operation. How long ago was it?
I was abused in 1965 at the age of 8.
Turkish native Enes Kanter plays for the New York Knicks, but he won't play against the Washington Wizards next week in London. First, explain. You're an NBA star.
Yep.
How come you have actual fears for your life once you're out of this country? Why is President Erdogan allegedly after you?
He's going to go ahead and attack the Kurds in Syria.
We should remember, though, that the Kurds are not only relying on the United States for security, but also on Russia and President Bashar al-Assad. The reason President Trump wants to see oil prices low from Saudi Arabia is because he needs the Iran oil sanctions to keep going. It's not for American consumption. Well, I guess we can assume the Crown Prince is not just a good Samaritan. He's expecting some quid pro quo from Pakistan, and it's going to be a military one.
You're absolutely right.
Please welcome I-24 News anchor Tal Heinrich.
Let's talk about the AIPAC conference for a second, because this event was once seen as a must-attend place for people seeking to get to the highest offices in U.S. politics. And yet a long list of Democratic candidates for 2020 is not attending this year's conference, or in the words of Vice President Mike Pence from this morning, boycotting it. This is one of the reasons why President Trump has called the Democratic Party anti-Israel, anti-Jewish. He's trying to make Congresswoman Ilhan Omar the new face of the Democratic Party. But the Democratic Party, they made it easy for the president to do so after deliberating for days over what should have been a no-brainer. What do you think about that?
I think it's a very dangerous development.
But, Senator, if you can explain, where do you see the line cross between legitimate criticism of the state of Israel and anti-Semitism? What's your definition? The final text of the resolution is so politically correct, and I don't think the Democrats are going to defeat President Trump with being more politically correct than ever. More than 6 million eligible voters have one question to answer. Will they give Prime Minister Netanyahu another term in office? Or, after 10 consecutive years in power, will voters decide it's time for a change? That's right. It's 2:30 a.m. here in Israel, and it seems that as the night continues, we get more and more results which reflect a much better picture for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And we just heard before the break, Prime Minister speaking to his base, to his supporters. He was very emotional, and his speech, Michelle, sounded like it's the speech of Israel's next prime minister. It was a different side of Benjamin Netanyahu that we saw tonight. He teared up. He kissed, a very long kiss there with his wife, Sarah. We very rarely or never before have seen such a side of Prime Minister Netanyahu. Israel's left and right are certainly split over security concerns, but differences over economic policy are nothing like here in the U.S. In Israel, you'll find figures who back workers' unions and fight to regulate big businesses on both sides of the political spectrum. Not so in the U.S., where the economic debate often concentrates around capitalism versus socialism. Israel barely has what Americans would call libertarians or staunch capitalists, and speaking against the welfare state would put off a lot of Israeli voters. Medicare for all, Green New Deal, is it or is it not socialism? Illegal immigration, providing migrants health care coverage, ending private health care, reparations for slavery. I think the United States will flourish like Venezuela is flourishing. Is that what the founding fathers had in mind? When you're talking to people there in Caracas, what are they hoping to see happening next? Do they wish to see a U.S. military intervention, for example? But in the meantime, Russia is holding its own troops, even its own military planes in Venezuela. What's their strategy? Can Russia prevent a regime change, or did they already prevent one? Welcome back. It's debate night in America. You just heard Mitch McConnell calling the Mueller investigation case closed. When is it really going to be the time to move on? The president is giving the attorney general sweeping powers in his investigation into the origins of the Russia probe. So we see John Brennan and James Comey pointing fingers at each other. Does it mean they're really concerned about what this investigation will find? So James Comey, he justifies the FBI's actions in 2016 as lawful actions. He claims that the FBI wasn't spying on the Trump campaign, but rather investigating. Is he whitewashing this? Trump's former lawyer, John Dowd, he did ask for a heads up from Flynn's attorney. But there's no way to turn it around. This voicemail message has undergone some selective editing. How significant, how striking is the difference between the edited version and the original one in your view? Despite numerous refusals, special counsel Robert Mueller will testify on Capitol Hill. And having Mueller testify, that keeps the impeachment narrative alive.
They're worried that it's going to backfire on them, and that's a good worry.
Okay, but in order to impeach, you have to convince the American public that there are grounds for impeachment, no?
Correct.
Were you surprised? I'm sorry, I can't help but...
Maybe Eli wants to go pick up his daughter and bring her a part of the show. Would that help?
We would love to hear what she thinks about Bernie Sanders running for presidency in 2020. Maybe that's her reaction, in fact.
Eli, is she near you?
She's close enough, but it was certainly my reaction this morning.
Tal, I know how much you enjoy avocado toast. It's going to make that a lot more expensive for you, too.
What, like $20 in New York? That's the price right now.
Absolutely.
Whoa.
Something just exploded
we
in
had
the
a bulb
studio,
that just
bulb
blew
or
in the
something.
studio
All right.
here. Apologies for that.
Theoretically, I just want to ask you really briefly, Professor, if we ever get there, how do you decide who to compensate and where does it stop? I mean, what about Native Americans, for example? If you had to advise President Trump, let's say, just ahead of the second summit, what would you tell him?
Oh, my gosh. I would be, don't go.
The United States has released images they say show Iran is behind attacks on 2 oil tankers in the Gulf of Oman. The strikes happened as Japan's Prime Minister Shinzo Abe visited Iran. Like President Trump is still hoping that the Iranian regime will give him the call, but is it likely to happen?
The Iranian government, China, is trying to use the good old tricks, right, of trying to shift the public focus in Iran from the economic situation to the shared enemy of everyone, which is the United States. This is the building to my right that you can look at right now. Mohammad Javad Zarif, the Iranian foreign minister, has just left the building. He delivered a speech over there and held a conversation. And on the other side of the street, as you can see, a couple of dozens of people with the mascots of President Hassan Rouhani as well as Ayatollah Ali Khamenei are chanting change, 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 regime change in Iran. 40,000 people, Ami, and they're loud and they're happy. It's a beautiful day to be celebrating Israel here on 5th Avenue. Actually, it's not such a beautiful day as you can see. It's pretty gloomy. But for 2 times a year, New York City has its own magical, beautiful sunsets.
Now, Tal, how many languages do you speak?
I speak 4 languages.
And you've been on television, anchoring or presenting, in all 4 languages.
In all 4. שלום לכם וערב טוב, אתם איתנו ב7 מהדורת יום שני, ט"ז בטבת, כאן בערוץ 20.
أهلا وسهلا أعزائنا المشاهدين وفي حوار اليوم سنلتقي شخصية أردنية بارزة.
Bei diesem Erfolg ist es kein Wunder, dass so viele große Firmen unseren Sender als wichtige Marketingplattform für ihre Marken sehen.
And the Security Council just about to start the session.
Tal, I think you summed it up.